Hello, my name is Marcus. I'm the compiler of a collection of therapy quotes entitled Psychoanalytic Self-Awareness Quotes. This is TQ 434 to 439. Therapy quote number 434. Ralph Tymms presents the double motif as an allegorical representation, or as a projection of the second self of the unconscious. So here we're calling the unconscious the second self, right? So we've had the stranger within, the secret self, now the second self, the bag that we drag behind us, and in the bag we have everything that we don't know about ourselves in the bag, everything that we've denied, rejected, split off, disassociated, all that we can say is in the metaphorical bag that we drag behind us, as Robert Bly says. It's the one who walks with us, who doesn't look like us, but is us. So that's the double motif. TQ 435. The older concept of the soul as a duality, the person and his shadow, appears in modern man in the motif of the double, assuring him on the one hand of immortality and on the other threateningly announcing that he won't live forever. So one idea, apparently long ago, sometimes this second self, or this unconscious side, or the stranger within, so this double motif, right? Sometimes this double, again, the unconscious side, or the second self, was considered to live forever. Okay. So the one idea around that is that if the person's an artist and he's drawing from regarding his feelings, or the poet is making a poem, maybe that's going to live forever, right? And so anybody who has that idea or fantasy of a double or a second self, in literature, it addresses our fears and our wishes around mortality. So in literature, we talk about the double character. It's to address our fantasy of living forever, our narcissism, but on the one hand, and on the other hand, we know the reality that no one lives forever. So it has that dual aspect to it. So there's a link between the idea of our conscious self and our unconscious self, addressing our fears and wishes of wanting to live forever and knowing that we're not going to live forever. So there's that idea. Again, the older concept of the soul as a duality, the person and his shadow, appears in modern man in the motif of the double, assuring him on the one hand of immortality and on the other threateningly announcing that he won't live forever. Okay, so the next one's TQ 436. Wilhelm Wundt believes that the shadow soul, the alter ego, as far as we can tell, has its soul source in dreams and visions. So now we can add. So we have the second self, the unconscious self, the stranger within, the bag that we drag behind, the skeleton, and our unconscious history, the shadow self. Now we can say the shadow soul, because the feeling self is in the bag, right? The inner child is the guardian of the feeling self, so the shadow soul. The alter ego, we can sometimes say. So the source, the composition of the alter ego, or the shadow soul, or the unconscious, he's just simply saying it, he's simplifying it, he's just simply saying it. It's mainly our dreams, so what we don't know about ourselves, and our visions, maybe our fantasies, maybe it's, I think what he means is our disassociated So whenever we put something in the bag, it's disassociated. So that's like a vision in a way. It's you, it's from you, but you're not aware that it's from you. It's disassociated, so it goes in the bag. So now it's a kind of vision, a vision of you or something. Or maybe your lost hopes and dreams of your future. That's could be a vision that goes in the bag. So everything that we're not aware of is in the bag. So we can add to our collection of the moral revolution, which is to get to know thyself. But to get to know thyself, we have to get to know the totality of the self, which is the conscious and the unconscious self, the second self. So we have to get to know the second self, to know thyself, right? That's the moral revolution. Wilson says, Lowell says, it's man's evolutionary task to know the second self. Its maturity is getting to know this second self, this shadow soul, this alter ego, all right, the double, and so on. For example, if we don't, the warning, literature gives us a warning in TQ 43. In TQ 437. The play called The Student of Prague shows how the feared self obstructs the love for a woman. Okay, so he's calling, okay, the second self, the unconscious self, the double, the stranger within, he's calling it the feared self, okay? And if we ignore the shadow, if we ignore the second self, if we ignore the contents of the bag, everything that we don't know about ourselves, if we ignore all that, it can interfere with the ability to love another person. Because fear of intimacy is in the bag. So if we don't face the fear of intimacy, how are we going to be intimate? How are we going to be emotionally intimate with another person, right? So that The Student of Prague became a silent movie. It was a big hit apparently back in the days of silent films. And I remember the very opening scene of that movie. The very opening scene has a headstone. It says, "Here lies the man who was afraid to face his shadow." Right? He struggled with his shadow. He ran away from it. He avoided it. He fought with it sometimes, and he lost or something. So now he's in the so the opening scene was in a graveyard, right? And there's the headstone there, and it said, "Here lies the man who fought with his shadow and he lost." Right? It's interesting. So that was sort of a warning, because in that play, the man could, like Narcissus, who also ignored his shadow self, his second self, he couldn't love another person, right? That's what happens. That's the consequence of ignoring our second self. The ability to love is in the second self. Like Robert Bly says, you got to get that out of the bag and reintegrate it into yourself. Unhappiness is a malady of the personal synthesis. So we're seeking wholeness, we're seeking integration, we're seeking synthesis. So we look in the bag, we get to know the stranger within the second self, our alter ego, our shadow soul, what else? The double. We get to know our double. And then we can enjoy the fruits of that, right? The ability to love is one of the fruits of that. From its very beginning, TQ 438, from its beginning, psychoanalysis might well have been characterized by the words of Terrace, quote, "I am a human being, and so I believe that nothing human is foreign to me." So that's the goal of psychoanalysis, so that nothing's strange to you. So we get to know the stranger within, so it's not strange to you. If we're estranged from ourselves, if we're estranged from the second self, then we're estranged to others. And like Narcissus, we're not really able to love other people. These quotes mainly come from a book by Otto Rank. His story is interesting. You know, he wrote the book about birth trauma, but back then, and he was respected and well known originally, and once he wrote that book about birth trauma, everyone rejected him. And everything he wrote after that, no one wanted to read him. It's kind of sad how people didn't want to face the pain of birth. It was too painful to admit that birth trauma can affect us so much. But he's the guy that really started our awareness about birth trauma. One of his books is called The Double, The Shadow, and he compiled throughout literature many examples of literature. Like, for example, the Student of Prague, that comes from that book, The Double, and he describes that play and many others. It's in that book, a little book apparently. Okay, so just one last quote regarding The Double. Somebody wrote a review for his book, The Double. So the reviewer said regarding his book,